Hey everybody, welcome to Pint of Science Show 11. Over the next hour, I'm going to show you a quick snippet of my world. As academic scientists, we often feel that our science comes first. It is our passion. That's what brought us to the labs for the late nights, early mornings, lack of sleep, and our parents not having a clue what we are doing. There is also a fallacy that science is objective and apolitical. These last few months have shown us many examples where this is not the case. Biases abound and can have profound consequences on daily life. But this was apparent for some of us way before this year, and it goes much deeper. Our science, without proper checks, balances, review, and diversity of thought, can be perverted and harm certain demographics, whether intentionally or otherwise. In recent history, this harm has often been at the expense, denigration, and dehumanization of Black people. But who advocates for people who look like me? As a Black scientist, it is hard to just focus on our work. The first thing people see is our skin. We are homogenized by this, and the society around us has often come to a conclusion about us as Black people before we even utter a word. In our institutions, we are often the onlys or the pioneers and are ambassadors for people who look like us in a system that actively shows bias against us. Inequity in our society plays out in many forms. As a young Black man, I am 9 times more likely to be stopped and searched than my white counterpart. My future wife, if Black, is 5 times more likely to die in childbirth than a white woman. I am 4 times more likely to be detained under the Mental Health Act. And between the Black awarding gap in higher education, disproportionate effects from disease, it goes on and on and on. Heck, after being followed around nearly every shop by a security guard, I always make sure I have a receipt. From education to healthcare, we see these same trends. With all our degrees and accolades, we are not immune to racial disparities. Even when we try to focus on the science, society reminds us of our skin. Today, you'll hear from honest experiences from amazing scientists and friends of mine who've become part of support systems for myself and many others during this difficult period. We have set up communities and grown as people, similar backgrounds, but unique experiences that have brought us together. We will also be asking for respectful audience interaction. Drop your questions in the chat and we will try our best to respond to you live. So let's get into it. I'm De-Shaine, a 3rd year PhD student at Imperial College London in the field of neurotechnology. I develop devices to monitor the brain after severe trauma and stroke. And I am your host, and this is Skin, Society, Science. So my special guests today are all my friends. We're all based in either the UK, US, or Canada, but our origins actually span 12 different countries, including Jamaica, Ireland, St. Kitts and Nevis, Montserrat, Ghana, Nigeria, Somalia, St. Martin, and the Netherlands. We in ourselves are diverse. My first set of guests consists of my friends based in the UK, who are all doing or have done scientific PhDs. So firstly, we have Simone Webb. Now she is a 2nd generation Jamaican migrant to the UK and a 3rd year PhD researcher in Bioinformatics and Immunology at Newcastle University. Second to our screen is Mary Agupon. And Mary is a 2nd year PhD researcher in neurodevelopmental psychology at King's College London on the ESRC LIST DTP. Mary is also the co-founder of the West African Research Collective. Next, we have Faisal Farah. Now, Faisal is a 2nd year PhD student on the Medical Imaging CDT course, working jointly between King's College London and Imperial College London. He is also the co-founder of Somali Academics. Next, we have Louisa. Now, Louisa Brotherson is a 3rd year PhD student on the Manchester-Liverpool NERC DTP, working in the University of Liverpool's Rock Deformation Lab. Next to our screens is Gabby. Gabriella Morrison is a final year PhD student at Imperial College London, and she's based in the Department of Chemical Engineering. We also have with us Stanley, and Stanley Baffange is a second-year PhD student at the University of Bristol, and he's on the 4-year British Heart Foundation program. And last but not least, we have Dr. Ruth Agbakova, who is an academic and industry consultant in the field of health and biomedical informatics. She holds a PhD in digital health innovation from the University of Glasgow. So Simone, I'm coming straight to you. Bioinformatics and immunology, how do you use them together and what are they?
Firstly, that was such a powerful introduction, De-Shaine, so thank you. Yeah, so bioinformatics and immunology, I guess to start with that, I'd say when people think about scientists or conventional scientists, they imagine people in a lab coat that are conducting experiments in a lab, right? But that's not the full picture. What happens particularly in the present day is that after those experiments are conducted, there's a massive amount of data that needs to be analyzed so that the scientists can get some robust conclusions from that. And so that's where bioinformatics comes in. Bioinformatics is the field of science that is all focused on data analysis using computational methods like coding. And so that's what I do. By default, I guess bioinformaticians are interdisciplinary. So depending on the lab that we're getting that data from, we're also part of different disciplines. So that's why I sit within both bioinformatics and immunology, because my research group specifically looks at immunology, looks at immunology during human development. So we look at how babies form their immune systems. And so within that, my PhD is specifically focused on how babies form their immune systems in the bone marrow. So it gets really niche really quickly, but bones and bone marrow are interesting because they are the place that all of us as adults on this call, that's where we're making a lot of our blood and immune cells in adult life. So looking at how it got made in the first place helps us to understand adult life and also, adult life in the immune system in adult life, and also, I guess, when it goes wrong in adult life as well. So I use bioinformatics, data analysis, and immunology, the immune system, to understand how the immune system's made in fetal life. Hope that makes sense.
No, perfect. Thank you. So next, I'm actually coming to Mary. So your research looks at autism and attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, which we know is ADHD. So what is your goal when you're researching these areas of neurodivergence?
Thank you, De-Shaine. So yeah, like you said, my research is in development of autism and ADHD. And so for my research, we combine studying behavior as well as neurophysiological development using EEG and eye tracking in infants. And essentially we follow up these infants and toddlers who have an autistic older sibling or an older sibling with ADHD, or typically developing older sibling. And essentially this is because these infant siblings are at increased familial likelihood of autism and or ADHD. And so because autism and ADHD often co-occur, it's quite interesting to look at them and sort of explore the distinct developmental pathways as well as developmental pathways that might overlap. And sometimes I'm asked, like, why are you following these infants from when they're only a few months old? And that's important because when you're diagnosing autism, a lot of the information required needs to come from a parent or caregiver, and it relies on early information from early years in life. And so essentially following up these children from early on, from when they're only a few months old, it essentially helps us to gain more understanding about child development. And by combining these various methods, we're hoping to be able to identify early behavioral markers and neural signatures of autism and ADHD. So yeah.
Lovely, thank you very much. So next I'm coming to Faisal. So I have a background in chemistry, so I know a little bit about contrast agents. But why do we need different contrast agents for imaging the body?
So that's a really good question. So we have a variety of different imaging techniques, such as MRI, ultrasound, and CT scans that allow doctors to look inside of our bodies in a non-invasive manner. And each of these imaging modalities or techniques work by exploiting the native contrast that's available within our tissues, allowing doctors to distinguish between different types of tissues and organs. Now, in some cases, these imaging techniques are limited in exploiting the native contrast that's available with our tissues. And in these cases, especially in complex diseases such as cancer, they need a helping hand in the form of a contrast agent. Now, contrast agents, as you can sort of tell from the name, essentially work by enhancing the contrast provided by the medical imaging scans. And these are substances that you inject in the body. Now, for every single imaging technique or imaging modality, you need a specific type of contrast agent that works by exploiting a mechanism by which the imaging modality works by. And that sort of explains why we have a variety of different contrast agents. Now, what researchers like myself are doing is we're making contrast agents that can work for 2 or more imaging modalities. So rather than having one for every single imaging modality, you can just have one injection and that can work for 2 or more imaging modalities, allowing you to improve the diagnosis and allows you to inject less of the substance inside the patient.
Thank you for that summary. That's pretty cool. So Louise, I'm coming to you next. Now, I know you study earthquakes. So what actually led to your passion, especially in a country that isn't considered very seismically active?
Yeah, that's super true, De-Shaine. And it's actually quite funny because there was an earthquake that literally just happened on Tuesday in Bedfordshire. So, but that's, you're right, it's very rare and we tend to get really small ones in the UK. Well, so my family's background, so my grandparents are from Jamaica and St. Kitts, and in the Caribbean, there's loads of different natural hazards that happen. So you have earthquakes, volcanoes, hurricanes are quite common. So I've kind of always had this interest in how planet Earth works and how like we as humans interact with Earth. So that kind of led me towards studying earth sciences at uni. I didn't know what earth sciences was until someone was like, oh, you can try and understand Earth using, you know, science and using physics and things. So that led me towards what I'm doing now. While we don't have many earthquakes in the UK, what you can do and what I do, because there's so much we don't understand about earthquakes, and earthquakes can kill thousands and they're so dangerous and cause massive devastation, can cause tsunamis. So what we can do is try and mitigate the risk. So try and reduce that vulnerability by, you know, earthquake proofing buildings, understanding which areas are more at risk, which populations are more at risk and things, and also understanding how earthquakes work themselves. So there's so much we don't understand about, because we can't dig deep into the earth, we can't see what's happening when an earthquake's happening. So I do experiments at high pressures similar to earth pressures to try and make mini like kind of small versions of earthquakes, and so we can actually control those conditions and see what under what conditions we have certain earthquakes and things. So that's why I do it, because I find it interesting and there's so much more that we don't understand about them.
Thank you very much for the answer. That cleared a lot of things up for me. So next we have Gabby, and I'm going to ask, so you're based in the Department of Chemical Engineering at Imperial, but your background is in cellular and molecular medicine. So briefly, can you describe how you actually got to this stage?
So yes, as you mentioned, my background / my undergraduate degree is in cellular and molecular medicine. And from early on in my degree, I've been interested in how we can use cells and other biological systems in the treatment of disease, mainly cancer, which is what I'm interested in. So I then chose to undertake a master's degree, master's in research in nanomedicines, using it for drug delivery. So fast forward to now, my PhD is in cell engineering, which is applying the principles of engineering, like controlling the behavior of cells, how we can change the behavior and modify cells to change its characteristics. So in being in the chemical engineering department, I get to apply the principles of engineering, but to the problems of cell and molecular biology. So I really get the best of both worlds, being interested in 2 areas of science, combining them to make my PhD project.
Thank you for the answer. It's really cool, combining 2 passions. So Stanley, I'm coming to you next, and I know that you work on the heart, but if I'm honest with you, I don't know much more. So can you please tell the people briefly what you do?
Yeah, so my work focuses on a disorder of the heart, which is specific to diabetics. It's called diabetic cardiomyopathy. So in simple terms, that is a reduced functioning of the heart, which can ultimately lead to heart failure. So our lab group has found that there's a reduced structure. It's broken down within the vessels of the heart, and that structure is called the glycocalyx. So that is when I come in. My aim is to try and restore this glycocalyx and hopefully improve some of the symptoms associated with diabetic cardiomyopathy.
Thank you. Perfect. I still don't know what you're talking about. So Ruth, I'm coming to you next. You're at the intersection of where science and technology meets people. So could you please tell me what you're actually doing, what is quite a varied role?
Oh, okay. So I consider myself so fortunate to be able to combine my passions for science and technology and helping people in very unique but essential ways. So I'm a social scientist, and my research combines implementation science, informatics, and healthcare. And I specialize in upscaling new innovations and how we can use it to improve patient care. This is important because many healthcare systems around the world are leveraging technology as a means to provide high quality and efficient care. And we can see that in our NHS with NHSX. However, there is a translational gap between technology we know can optimize health and well-being and those that actually get implemented in everyday practice. So I look at the contextual factors, the critical success factors affecting uptake and adoption at scale, develop recommendations for policymakers and change agents. And as an industry consultant, I've been fortunate to work on many projects which are usually the first of its kind. And so I'm very excited to be working at the forefront of innovation. One of the most recent projects I worked on was the UK's first integrated electronic health record with a clinical trials discovery platform. And that was powered by artificial intelligence. So thank you.
Thank you. A true definition of a pioneer. Just to put that out to the audience, we are looking for your questions. So this is supposed to be interactive. So keep them coming and bring them into the chat. But Simone, I'm coming to you next. What is the biggest challenge you would say that you faced in your scientific career today?
Okay, hey. I would definitely say the biggest challenge that I faced so far has been my diagnosis of rheumatoid arthritis. So that happened in the final year of my undergraduate degree. I was doing undergrad masters, and in the 4th year I was diagnosed. And this was just a massive upheaval to my life, really. I had to adjust to limitations in my mobility. I had to adjust to the fact that I had a chronic condition that was going to last my whole life. That involved chronic pain and fatigue and taking medications every day. And being a patient, learning how to be a good patient that went to all of the appointments, did all of the scans, and actually thought about what care I was receiving. So that was a really tumultuous time for me, I think. And I think up until that point, so up until the 4th year of my undergrad, I had already not come to terms with, but sort of understood that the world interacted with me in a certain way because of visible factors, namely the fact that I'm a woman and the fact that I'm Black, right? Like I'd understood that. But I now had something that was invisible and if disclosed could also pose barriers. And this was different, this was new, this was a massive part of, I guess, the new normal that I adapted to, yeah? And the reason I share this and I say this was the biggest challenge is because I think it underscores the fact that, I guess, Black people, Black researchers, Black scientists in general are not a monolith. We all have completely different perspectives that we're coming from, whether it is the fact that we come from completely different backgrounds or regions in the UK, or the fact that we've gone through different experiences. We are not a monolith, and everybody on the panel today right now, so I don't know, 7 of us, 7? I can't count. 8. I do science, I swear. 8 of us, okay. We all come from so many different perspectives, and there's nuance in this group today. So I think that's useful to think about when we're having this discussion today. There is so many different sort of points of view that are being expressed here. And one of them, for example, from my point of view, would be disability as well, or invisible disability.
Most definitely. Thank you for sharing that and being so honest. Mary, I'm coming to you next with this question. Now, leading to what we now know as the West African Research Collective, we had quite a few conversations. Now, why did you feel so strongly about setting up that group?
That's a really good question. And so essentially for me, and also Umi Kuyate, who's co-founder of the West African Research Collective, for us, community is a really key word. And essentially, we felt the need to build up a community of support and a place where we could encourage each other, which is very similar to what you set up, De-Shaine, with the African Caribbean Research Collective. And many of us as Black scientists, as Black researchers, a lot of us on this call, oftentimes, like you earlier mentioned, De-Shaine, we are the only Black people in our labs or in our research teams. And if we're not the only, we're one of very few. And so that's certainly my story. Even going back as far as my master's degree, my undergraduate degree, there were a couple of us as Black students. But when I got to my master's degree, I was the only Black student in my master's course. And I am the only Black person in my research team. And so it was the first time I'd ever had a Black teacher or lecturer during my master's time as well. And so for many of us, there is a lack of representation of Black academics. And we see that through our experiences, but we also see that through reports like the Leading Roots report, which was released in 2019, the Broken Pipeline report, which essentially showed that over a 3-year period, only 1.2% of Black students were funded. And this is out of almost 20,000 students. I am one of those 1.2%, and a couple of you guys on the call are also one of the 1.2%. So it's a really striking figure, but for us, it's not new. We feel that and we see that as we navigate our campuses day in and day out. And there's no sort of number of degrees or qualifications that can sort of protect us from institutional racism, that can protect us from racism day-to-day life. We navigate academia within our Blackness. And so for us, it's essential to have these sort of safe spaces, to have these communities where we can essentially speak and feel like we're being encouraged by each other, and also where it can feel lonely sometimes in academia. And I think especially when you don't see yourself reflected in your peers or in the academics around you, I think it's important to have a safe space like that. And so essentially after those kind of conversations that we've had, and after speaking with Umi, who's not on this call, we took the initiative and we very much made our own spaces where essentially things aren't getting lost in translation because we're coming in with that common ground. And so with the West African Research Collective, all of us are of West African descent, and it's a safe space, it's an encouraging space, builds a sense of community, and importantly, it helps to empower us to just keep going on this academic journey, and to just uplift each other. And for all of those reasons and more, I guess it's genuinely an honor to co-lead on the West African Research Collective and to continue to work with other Black researchers and Black academics.
Thank you, Mary. No, we really do appreciate the work that you do. And I definitely echo just how empowering it can be to be in a safe space and be able to just freely talk, because often we do find ourselves the onlys. So there's a question in the chat from Sarah, who has asked, how would you take advantage of research opportunities during your undergrad degree, especially now that almost everything is online? That's a hard question, actually, because I think a lot of us haven't done undergraduate degrees during a period like this, and it's pretty, I hate to say it's unprecedented. Louisa, do you mind taking that question?
No, I don't mind, it's fine. It's good to think about, and thanks, Sarah, for your question. I was just thinking because so my research is both lab and computer based, but what I kind of know from doing research and doing computer based research is that often you'll get lecturers or researchers who will have collected data in the past and might want to kind of analyze that data, whether it be, there's different means of analyzing it. So it's worth talking to your lecturers, your academics, your mentors, PhDs as well. They're a valuable source, and postdocs, to see whether they have any sort of mini research project that they could work on, whether that be, they collected some data that's just lying around, or there's potentially just analogs you could do, or like literature review. So it's about kind of, trying to find ways of working, because we're all trying to find ways of working. It's so hard at the moment. Like, I know like lots of us have just returned to labs, and for undergrads, there's going to be, it's more limited because it's limited for everyone, because these are crazy, like these are times. But yeah, I would say if you can like get some past data and try and analyze that, or that's probably the best way to kind of do it. And probably also take this time to build up on those skills that you can do virtually, whether that be, so in my field, you can do virtual field work, so you could get virtual field skills, you could pick up some code, there's other kind of skill sets that you might be able to develop. So talk to your mentors if you have some, or personal tutors, see if they have that sort of scope that you can go into, is what I'd say.
Thank you very much for that summary. I'm coming to this next question is for Simone. So it's in the chat. It's from Matilda. Matilda's asked, how did getting the diagnosis change the way you do research?
So thank you for the question, Matilda. I think before my diagnosis, I was leaning towards doing research that was half lab-based and half coding-based. But I think obviously the diagnosis sort of exacerbated that decision-making process. I had to think to myself which way I would sort of veer toward. And it ended up pushing me more toward the coding side of things, because if I'm honest with you, RA is a disease that leaves you sometimes maybe in bed quite a lot. It's a chronic pain condition, so that happens. And so actually I spent a lot of time in bed coding, and then I felt more comfortable with that side of things, right? And then I also realized, and I was honest with myself, said, okay, can I really stand up for hours and hours pipetting? Maybe not. Maybe my wrists can't take that. So I think in a sort of practical sense, it changed the path I went down. And final point to end on, it changed the way I interacted with my supervisors or my mentors at the time. Because having an invisible condition, oftentimes people don't realize what's going on, realize what the situation is. And so it meant, I think for me, that I had to become a lot more honest. And I had to be really clear and have very clear communication with my supervisor in order to be able to get the time that I needed, not physically in the lab if I needed it, or the time that I needed to attend appointments if I needed to. So it meant that I had to create those kind of relationships. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you very much, Simone. So I'm going to go to Gabby next. This is a direct question for you. So Maria has asked, what are the difficulties in navigating such an interdisciplinary field, and how do you go about tackling them?
I think for me, in my personal case, I was more comfortable with the biology side, looking at cells, molecules. That was my speciality. But coming into chemical engineering, I wasn't too familiar with the background there. So I think that was the biggest difficulty, learning the techniques and what engineers may use and applying it to biology. I think to go about tackling them is to, one, read around your subject. There's so much knowledge out there which can help you. And secondly is to ask for help. So this involves supervisors, even people in my lab who have done directly undergraduate courses in chemical engineering. They've been great in pushing me along and giving me the knowledge. And I guess that's what we're all here for. It's not to just take your knowledge and go in one direction by yourself, but you're there to help other people. And by working as a team and being as a team, it's really helped me progress in my PhD.
Thank you very much. So the next question is from, I think it's Julia. For Stanley, there's quite a few questions on this, but one I'm going to ask, because of time, is what are the current treatments for diabetic cardiomyopathy?
That's a good question. So the current treatments, they have a lot of drugs to try and restore the function, diastolic function and systolic function. But then there is also, of course, the natural health aspect that we cannot ignore, in the way that you live your life, the foods that you eat, and the amount of exercise you do a day. Those are all contributing factors, especially if it is type 2 diabetes. We know that there are so many other things that are associated with those things, such as obesity and high blood pressure. And a lot of these things can be helped, at least, with tackling of your diet and exercise. That's not to say that it's complete and that is the perfect way, but it helps. It's something that we should always consider as well.
So Ruth, I'm coming to you next. So there's a question in the chat from Craig, which essentially says, do you think the reviving of the BLM movement will mean that we as Black scientists can be more outspoken without worrying about our career prospects? Ruth, taking that question.
That's a very good question, and I believe we are at a pivotal moment in time in academia with Black Lives Matter, and it's important to note before we're seen as academics or scientists that we are people. A positive I can take from this current situation is that it is shining a spotlight really brightly on many of the issues that already existed in academia, And this time around, I firmly believe that much needed change is imminent. The particular issues we face as Black academics and scientists around the world demonstrate that there isn't an even playing field. And despite this, Black academics and scientists were still expected to perform, and many of the times we outperform. There's more work that needs to be done in terms of changing mindsets, as well as unjust systems and processes. However, we are seeing examples of great work that's being drafted to combat anti-Black racism on UK campuses, although this will take some time. However, there are a great deal of initiatives holding space in the meantime to support Black students. So for new and aspiring academics and those already in academia, there are initiatives to support and encourage and uplift us. We should speak out. We should feel safe to speak out. And non-academic Black academics should also cater to us when we do. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ruth. So this next question I'm going to pose to Faisal. Essentially, the question is from Lila, and it says, what did your experiences with race teach you? So Faisal, do you mind giving us?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I guess one of the main things that my experiences with race has taught me is that is the importance and value in mentorship and support networks. Especially given with the recent Black in the Eye retweets, it's a constant reminder that we will always find ourselves in places where we're reminded of our race, whether we are professor, postdocs, PhD students, and to sort of give it a personal twist to this as well. I remember during my sixth form, I had teachers like laugh at me and sort of embarrass me in front of the class by insinuating that I'm not clever enough to do chemistry and go on to do PhD. And that has really impacted me at the time. But were it not for the support that I found within my friends, I don't think I would have been able to progress. So that has also taught me the importance of mentorship. And this also gives, I guess, a reason as to why me and Ibrahim co-founded Somali Academics, because we realized the importance of finding a support network group. I think Marie sort of mentioned that before as well, that often we're sort of feeling isolated and lonely going in or like navigating through these academic spaces. So it's really important for us to be able to find our support and find mentorships as well. So I guess that's probably one of the main things that my experience with race has taught me, especially with the recent events that have happened.
So I've just realized the time is really flying. So we have time for one final question, which is going to come from Medina. So the question is, have any of you had any constructive conversations regarding racism with your co-workers, particularly in the last few months? Mary, I'm coming to you with this question.
That's a really good question. Thanks, Medina. And essentially, yeah, I have had a few of those sort of conversations, and I think what has been quite striking and quite interesting for me is realizing that for some of my co-workers, actually that's the first time I've actually had to have a conversation about their race and had to engage in a conversation about that. And there were very few sort of colleagues who did reach out and sort of ask questions and check that I was okay, given the height of what was going on essentially with racial trauma. And for us, like we've said, for a lot of us, this isn't new to us, but it has become heightened over the past few months. And so we're very used, a lot of us are very used to having conversations about our race, about being Black. And I think one of the things for me with some of these conversations that I notice in terms of being constructive is that actually where I've had these conversations with colleagues, they realize that actually this is not sort of a one-off conversation. It's not a seasonal thing. Like this is our race is something that we will carry and goes with us into every situation. And so the fact that, you know, we see a lot of statements being outpoured by whether it's institutions or universities, and I think it's been constructive and helpful for others to realize that that isn't sort of enough to be moving forward and that we need action. And I think it's good to see other people engaging, and I say other people, essentially non-Black people engaging in the conversation and realizing that actually they need to be doing more and speaking up and not waiting for us as Black researchers within our institutions to be the ones to speak up. So I think that essentially has been quite useful and constructive in that they're realizing that there's that they also play a part in this race discussion.
Thank you very much, Mary. I couldn't have put it better myself, in the sense that we did not create racism, so we cannot be alone in trying to dismantle it. So with that, I want to actually say thank you to the first panel. So that's to Simone, to Mary, to Louisa, to Stanley, Gabby, Faisal, and Dr. Ruth. So that ends our first panel, but we are not done yet. So essentially, I've given you an insight into the world, or what I'm used to seeing in the UK. But the next set of researchers that we have actually hail from not just the UK, but the US and Canada. So for the second half of this hour, essentially, we're going to talk about my favorite organ, which is the brain, which, funnily enough, Pint of Science happens to have on here. But yeah, a lot of these scientists, or those that you're going to see now, would actually describe themselves as being Black in neuro. So all were somewhere involved in planning a highly successful online campaign, which was started and led by Angeline Jukes. And for me, essentially Black in Neuro was about positivity. It was about visibility. And we really wanted to spread joy in essentially a time that was really dark, very difficult, and really combat anti-Blackness in a positive way. Now, for us, the week was so successful that we have a lasting community that has led on from that. And there's a lot more to come in the near future. So I have a few of those that were involved with me today. So I'm going to introduce them to you. Firstly, we have Cleona Kelly, and she is a second-year cybernetics PhD researcher at Aston University. Next, we have with us Sigoni. And Sigoni is a second-year PhD student at Cambridge, and she is in pediatric neuro-oncology with Cancer Research UK. Also with us, we have Dr. Brielle Ferguson, and she is a neuroscientist and postdoctoral fellow at Stanford. Next onto our screen is Liesl Richardson, and she is a second-year PhD student at the University of Central Florida in biomechanics, rehabilitation, and interdisciplinary neuroscience, also known as the Brain Lab, and she studies neuromechanics. We also have Danielle Nadeed with us, and she is a second-year master's student in neuroscience based out of McGill University in Canada. So thank you for all joining us. Cleo, now I'm coming to you first. So you combine virtual reality and EEG. For those who don't know, EEG is electroencephalography. Now, normally VR, well, I'm a bit of a gamer myself, so I've used VR before, but how are you repurposing it for your research goals?
So, as you said, De-Shaine, a lot of people use VR for gaming purposes, but we've actually found a better, questionably, use for it over in social sciences. So yeah, VR actually provides a controlled environment that we can safely kind of test these questions that possibly we wouldn't be able to do otherwise. Importantly, it provides participants with a safe space to actually practice certain things. And yeah, it also provides an immersive environment, which normally we wouldn't get with traditional experiments, which are normally kind of on screen.
Perfect, thank you. So Danielle, I'm coming to you next. So during your master's, you've worked on non-invasive brain stimulation. So why would you actually need to do that?
Yeah, absolutely. So non-invasive brain stimulation, like the name says, is stimulating the brain, but from the surface of the scalp instead of embedding the electrodes inside the brain, which can be, very, as you know, through your research, very challenging to do. And so these techniques have been used in a lot of clinical populations. So, for example, as a treatment for depression, for Parkinson's. It's also been used to boost cognition in older adults. So it's a very promising technique, but we really don't know how it works. And there's a lot of variability and a bit of a replication crisis in this field. So a lot of studies that don't converge on the same results because there's so many individual factors that can change how you respond to the stimulation. And so in my case, we're interested in using it as a treatment for patients who have become unresponsive after a brain injury and who haven't fully recovered. They survived their brain injury, but they can't speak, they can't move or respond. And it's shown promise there, but I'm looking at, how can we improve it? How can we tailor it to specific patients?
Thank you very much. Perfect answer. So Sigourney, I'm coming to you next. What cancer do you work on, and how do you research it? I'd love to know. You are muted.
Brain tumor? Oh.
Go again.
So I work on a rare type of children's brain tumor called supratentorial ependymoma, which took me a long time to learn how to say. So basically, my project is around modeling how we can figure out which cells are the cells of origin, and also with a collaboration with a medicinal chemistry group, figuring out whether we can develop compounds to treat some of these patients, purely because 40% of ependymomas are incurable, and this just isn't acceptable at the end of the day for these children who don't have a life ahead of them if they don't get these treatments. So part of my work is around drug screening and cell lines using human patient samples. And then the other part is developing mouse models and using those within my research to kind of model the disorder and then figure out how we can treat it best.
Thank you, Sigourney. As a next, Dr. Bria, I'm coming to you. So you research epilepsy. Can you tell us a little bit about your work?
Sure. So I work in a lab that studies absence epilepsy instead of the kind of classic convulsive seizures that many of us are more familiar with. These patients actually kind of space out, and they have these brief periods of unconsciousness that are accompanied with a lapse of motor function that can happen hundreds of times throughout the day. And currently, the treatments that we have only treat about 60% of patients. And so what our lab is interested in is trying to understand why these patients have seizures in the first place so we can better develop treatments. Now, to step back from epilepsy, my kind of broader interests are just in understanding different types of cognition. So how do we pay attention and filter out distractors? Or how do we hold information in our working memory and then manipulate that information to make decisions and guide behaviors? And I'm interested in this because oftentimes in diseases where we actually have good treatment for the hallmark symptoms, schizophrenia is a really good example. So we have good treatments for the psychosis. These patients also have cognitive impairments, and these are actually the largest predictors of functional outcomes. So how likely is it that they'll be able to hold down a job and kind of be an independent member of society? But we can't treat those cognitive impairments because we don't really know how they work in normal people and in normal mice. So in our lab, we use a genetic mouse model of absence epilepsy, where we have mice that have a mutation in the same gene that's also found in patients. And then we use those mice to better understand why they're having seizures. And then in my case, why they're also having attention impairments, because we also see in patients outside of when they're having the seizures, they also have trouble paying attention. And even when they respond well to drugs, they have these attention impairments that persist. And so to do this, I have mice that are epileptic or non-epileptic, and I can train them on attention tasks. And then while they're doing those attention tasks, I either record activity within their brain to see what's associated with good performance or poor performance, or I can manipulate activity in their brain to see if I can actually change or improve their performance. And then kind of the long-term goal is identifying kind of patterns of activity that are associated with poor performance, figuring out how to treat those, and then hopefully that can help move us toward better treatments for actual patients.
Wow, thank you, Ria. So Lisa, I'm coming to you next. You're a mechanical engineer by training. So you've made a bit of a pivot, I would say, into neuro. So can you explain a little bit about combining your passions and interdisciplinary work?
Absolutely. So yes, as De-Shaine mentioned, I am a mechanical engineer by training. I actually just received my master's in biomedical engineering with a focus on biomechanics. So that means I apply classical mechanics to UCF Brain Lab is neuromechanics. So neuromechanics is the intersection between neuroscience and biomechanics. And we have this theory that perhaps human locomotion and movement when it comes to rehabilitation is more about brain dynamics than it is about biomechanics. Of course, biomechanics is still involved, but with the rehabilitative devices out there that are robotic in nature, we are looking at brain areas to see which ones are being activated or inhibited during certain movements or during perturbations, so that we can better understand the brain dynamics, and so we can better design these devices for these kinds of interventions. So we look at stepping, we look at cycling, we look at walking, we look at balance. I specifically am looking at balance and cycling as it pertains to how subjects interact with visual art displays during rehabilitation. So it's actually really cool because I come from, before I was an engineer, I majored in biological sciences. I wanted to be a doctor. Part of me still wants to be a doctor, but we'll see. Med school is crazy long and I'm already tired through this PhD. But I'm also really good at engineering. So I kind of just stumbled into this interdisciplinary lab where I was able to, focus on neuroscience, which I love, but still apply my expertise to neuroscience. And so, yeah, that's about it.
Yeah, well, it sounds like an interdisciplinary lab is really good for you because you're someone of many talents. So, Clee, I'm going to you next. So, Black in Neuro, what did that mean for you, especially as an organizer?
So, Black in Neuro, I think, came at a time at which all of us desperately needed a community around us that we didn't have to explain kind of why we didn't feel up for it today, or we didn't have to explain why our day wasn't going so well because we all knew already. So it really provided a safe space for all of us to kind of communicate and connect with other people who were doing similar stuff to us, whether it was on a cellular level or on a computational level. But importantly, I think Black in Neuro has provided a platform for younger generations to aspire to kind of say, like, yes, there are people who look like you in this field and you are welcome here. So that's my biggest hope for Black in Neuro anyway.
Perfect, thank you. So, Sigourney, I'm going to you next. As someone that wasn't part of the organizing team, but you took part in Black in Neuro as a panelist on Black Journey to Neuro Day. So what was it like for you as a participant, and what was the effect essentially that Black in Neuro had on you?
Experience. I knew I would do this. For me, it was quite an overwhelming experience in a really, really positive way. I think to know that there was a community of Black researchers out there who had similar interests to me, who had a range of really cool backgrounds, was amazing. And then to also have the opportunity to talk about my journey into my PhD where I am now, because it wasn't so conventional. I didn't go straight from my undergrad into my PhD like a lot of people did. So it was nice to be able to explain that and to kind of give younger students who look like me a journey that wasn't straightforward, so that they were able to see it doesn't matter, you will make it. If that's what you want to do and it's your passion, you will get there. And to know that there are people ahead of them who are either paving the way or are just there for support and guidance if they needed it. So for me, being able to pass that on, but also to see people ahead of me doing that and to really build that network and to have now an amazing set of friends was just incredible.
Thank you. So, and from knowing your story personally, it is a very inspiring one, and can't wait to see what you continue to do. So Danielle, I'm coming to you next. So you were fundamental during our success in Black in Neuro Week, if I say so myself, but those who were there know exactly what I'm talking about. So how did the week impact you personally?
Yeah, I think it also came for me at a time when I was feeling, because of COVID-19 and the quarantine and research being shut down, and then like the recent events that were going on, I was feeling very lonely, and it was really a ray of sunshine to be able to talk to the other organizers and the rest of the Black and Neuro community online. It really brought me so much joy each and every day. And I think I was so impressed by how talented and just hardworking everybody was on the team. You know, putting this together while we have other commitments, we have research, we have jobs, we have families, and being able to put together something that I think really was very comprehensive and like on par with large conferences that take a whole year to organize. I was really like in awe by all that, and yeah, it was really a pleasure and a joy.
So I'm gonna actually take a little bit from that, and this is for Brielle. So you're essentially a US citizen, and Danielle kind of touched on the fact that these last few months have been quite lonely or very difficult for us. So how have the past few months been for you?
Sure. I want to preface what I'm saying by stating just how blessed I am. Like, I have job security, and I know people who have lost jobs, and my family is all still healthy currently, and I know people who have lost people to COVID-19. So I want to kind of preface everything I'm saying by that I am in some ways in a very privileged position. That being said, I think if I could sum it up in one word, it would be deeply, deeply tired. You know, the pandemic obviously has hit the US extremely hard, and it's highlighted a lot of already kind of pre-existing, long-standing inequalities that existed long before the pandemic even happened. And then for a long time, for most of us, like, we haven't been able to leave the house. We've been sheltering in place. So we're just hit by this constant onslaught of bad news, and we're just doom scrolling, and we're seeing there are more people dying from COVID-19, more senseless deaths, and more kind of preventable tragedies that were just, we could have avoided if our government had responded appropriately. So that's been really heartbreaking to see. And then on top of that, what we could argue is another pandemic has been going on the whole time, and that's that of anti-Black racism and all of the toxic ways that manifests across the world. But most visible recently has been the string of killings of unarmed Black people. But the difference is this time, and what's been positive about it, is that people actually paid attention, and, you know, they weren't able to look away. And people are actually listening to what marginalized communities have been saying all along, and that's that we're tired and we need change. So with all that going on, marginalized groups have been really showing up and putting in the effort long before this, and then we're asked to respond yet again to deal with this, and how our institution responds and kind of form these initiatives. And on top of that, we're doing organizing and activism work and advocacy work, probably in our community. We're out in the streets, we're marching, and it's just been exhausting in a way that I never kind of could have imagined. And then on top of that, you wonder, like, am I even being effective? Like, am I creating change? But at the same time, knowing that you can't really stop, like, you know that you have to keep putting in that work. So I think that was what was so amazing about Black and Neuro. It came at a really perfect time where we all really, the organizing team, we all poured our heart and soul into it. And then we actually were able to see those efforts reflected in this really, really successful week that the community responded to beautifully and was enthusiastic about and was supportive. And it was nice to be able to do something where I felt like I was actually making a difference.
Thank you very much for that, Brielle. So Lisa, I'm going to come to you as well as another Black and Neuro organizer. So what was your key takeaway from the week?
The key takeaway is that all of us have gone through, or we have been raised in a world where we have been disconnected from science careers because we didn't see folks that looked like us. So there was a gap to be filled by scientists, and we grew up to be those scientists that the younger generation can look up to and grow up to become. So that was the biggest takeaway. I was just so blown away by all of the beautiful faces that we got to see. All of the Black scientists talking about their research, their journeys, talking about the impact of mentorship and visibility and representation. It was just so beautiful to see. And like Brielle mentioned, I mean, it came at a time when we all needed it. We all really needed to feel like we belonged here in our spaces and in what we're doing and working towards. We belong here just as much as everyone else does. we can make a difference and change the culture of STEM and the world, probably, if we continue to organize like this. And so that was my biggest takeaway.
Thank you very much for that. And kind of leading on from that, we've seen a lot of Black in X weeks, and for those that aren't Twitter savvy, there are a lot of campaigns that are continuing to go on. So Sigourney, I'm coming to you next because I know that you're also a Black in Cancer Week organizer. So can you tell us a little bit about what your online campaign will bring?
Yeah, sure. So there's been a really amazing community of scientists that have come together. So for Black in Cancer Week, so for those who don't know, is October 11th through to the 17th. So that will be kind of a huge Twitter campaign, as well as there'll be Zoom talks. So our focus is basically to demystify a lot of things around cancer, and to kind of bring some clarity on myths that people believe about cancer, particularly within the Black community. Also to create some understanding around racial disparities in cancer, because as we've seen, and I know that not just the Black cancer community, but the Black community as a whole were rocked by the death of Chadwick Boseman, and understanding what cancer disparities mean, how we can kind of protect ourselves against those things, but also understanding what we can do in terms of cancer prevention in our own communities, and also just to pay homage to not only the scientists, the Black scientists who have brought cancer research this far, but also, you know, to pay homage to Henrietta Lacks, who is kind of the founder of all things cells and science and biology. So to pay homage to her, and also just a range of scientists, also not only the scientists, but the advocates as well, all of the cancer survivors, those who have lost people to cancer, to create an environment that is helpful and supportive, and allows a network from patient all the way through to researchers, to create that community and environment.
Perfect, thank you. So we actually have a question in the chat, which is from Louisa, which is asking directly, what would you say to others thinking about a Black in X week? One piece of advice. So Danielle, I'm going to come to you on that one.
I'm going to give 2 pieces of advice. So my first thing would be that your first goal really should be to build up your community. I think, like, if nothing else, like just when we did our Black in Neuro roll call, seeing all those faces and, you know, connecting with all those other Black scientists in your field, I think that had a huge, like almost instantaneous impact. And I think that's like the most important thing, because from there, once you have that strong foundation and community, you can really do a lot. And then my other piece of advice would be, within the organizing team, to just really, I think one of our strengths was being very transparent and open in our communications with each other. So, you know, being clear, you know, if you're not feeling well, if you're having a rough day, like, and you have too much on your plate and you need someone to step in, like being transparent about that kind of thing, it allowed it to run a lot more smoothly.
Thank you very much. So Fiona, this sorry, did people lose me just then? Sorry. Okay, so coming back to you again, Cleona. What advice would you give to your younger self if that person is there watching you today?
So I think one of the main things for me would be to just take every single opportunity that comes your way, no matter what it is, take it and decide afterwards whether that's something you're interested in or something that you'd rather not get into. But also just believing in yourself, because there's only so many times where external cues or external people can actually provide you with that feedback. There comes a time where you need to stick up for yourself, and you need to kind of advocate for yourself in the room and say, like, hey, I'm the person for that job. and the person for that opportunity give me the chance because I can fulfill the role. So yeah, definitely believing in yourself more and believing that there's always a space for you, because sometimes you will be the only in the room, but that doesn't mean that you're not supposed to be there.
Thank you. So we have another question in the chat from Matilde, which essentially is asking, what would be your advice for co-workers that would like to give you support and spread awareness, but don't know how to do it? So this is Matilde, sorry. And I'm going to pose this question to Liesl, if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure. So great question. I know that a lot of folks who want to be allies to their Black coworkers are asking this question. And I guess the number one thing would be to not burden your Black coworkers with the job to educate you. Because as we all have been mentioning in this panel, like we are all tired and going through it right now and every day. So the best thing that you can do to help out your coworkers is to do the work yourself. So that means diving into readings by Black authors on the topics that you want to look into, listening to podcasts hosted by Black folks and Black scientists, whatever have you, whatever's appropriate for where you work. And don't be afraid to get corrected, right? So if you are in practice of becoming an ally and you say something incorrect and someone tries to correct you, don't be offended. It is an opportunity to learn and to grow. And I think that a lot of the negative discourse that happens surrounding the Black Lives Matter movement and about race in general happens because folks are afraid to be uncomfortable, are afraid to be confronted with their own problematic behaviors. And I'm saying here to you, do not be afraid to confront that and to grow from it. You can do better. And then the last thing I would have to say is use your privilege for good and use your voice for good. So I am a light-skinned Black woman. I am a biracial woman. I know that I don't have the same struggles as the rest of the Black community may have. So I try to use my privilege for good. I try to use my voice and try to bring attention to issues that, folks otherwise wouldn't listen to. So what can you do as a non-Black ally or a non-Black coworker to help your Black coworkers or to help your Black colleagues, whether it is making sure they're provided the same equities and opportunities as you, ensure that their concerns are heard. If you hear something, see something, say something. So one of the biggest things that is incredibly harmful to Black coworkers is if someone says something racist and you don't stand up for that person that you're sitting next to, but then you whisper to them or send them a text later and say, that was kind of racist, wasn't it? Why didn't you say that out loud in the meeting? So standing up for folks, that's what it takes to do better. So that's my answer for that.
Wow, I think that was a perfect summary, to be honest with you, on essentially quite simple steps in how we can have quite effective allyship. So we have another question, which is from the chat, and essentially it's from Medina, and it's asking, how do we make sure initiatives like Black in Neuro are sustainable? I'm gonna ask Brielle, if you don't mind, can you take that question?
Sure. And this kind of piggybacks off a previous question about what made it so successful. I think a big part of our success is the way people showed up to support us. And a lot of that was through financial contributions and funding. So early on in the process, we were really intentional about soliciting contributions from our own institutions or reaching out to outside institutions. And then what I think really helped build momentum around Black in Neuro is after we got those early contributions, we then tweeted about it. And so I think Dr. Kayla Singleton and Ubada both tweeted that at Black in Neuro, we are showing people that we value the time and efforts of our community and people who put in the time to do this diversity work by compensating them. And to continue to do that, we need contributions. And these are the people that have given us those contributions. And after that, we were really amazed to see how this financial support just began to pour in. So I think this will be really critical in sustaining Black and Neuro and making sure that we can continue to provide content at the level that we did during the week for a long time to come.
Thank you very much. So we're pretty much there on time. I will say thank you very much to our second set of panelists, and I know a lot of you joined them from different time zones, and it's quite difficult to put that all together, but I really appreciate all of you. So firstly, thank you to Cleona, to Sigourney, to Brielle, to Liesl, and to Danielle. So that pretty much does it for today. I'm running a little over time, but I hope that you've appreciated the discussions from today, and know that this conversation will be continuing. This is just the beginning, and we've only scratched the surface in a very short space of time. But thank you to everyone that has joined today. The conversation will continue on Twitter from a lot of the community accounts that we have, from the ACRC UK to the West African Collective, to Somali academics, and to Black in Neuro. But also for us on our individual accounts, we're happy to connect with you and to talk and to keep this conversation going. So thank you everyone for coming.
My name is Adam. I will be your quiz master for this evening. I certainly hope you're going to enjoy yourself. Here we go.